Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is the Board of Selectmen's meeting for March 6, 2018. And we remind everybody that we're being recorded, and we always start with a moment of appreciation for our troops who are serving around the world. Thank you. The transfer station will be closed Easter Sunday, April 1st. Is that April 1st?
Oh, and it will be open the next two Sunday, not this Sunday, but the next two
The
Sundays.
11th and the 18th for
Just
storm
for-
debris only.
Only, yes.
Not regular trash, but storm debris only, on the 11th and 18th.
Correct.
And we have our first appointment this morning.
So it's 5 hours.
We'll get there. We have the Director of the Medfield Youth Outreach, Don Alcott. Don?
Good evening, I hope, right? It's evening. Oh.
The key is that it's still evening when you're finished.
Yes. So I've heard. Thank you for having me. I'm here tonight to talk about the budget increase in the youth outreach budget with the addition of a prevention specialist position. I've requested $30,000 for a part-time position for a prevention specialist. We've worked for several years to try to obtain grant funding for this position, and it has not worked out. Our office took on coordinating the Substance Misuse Coalition, the Prevention Coalition, and as a temporary placeholder until we could hire someone. And we're finding that with a consultant that we hired 2 years ago, that we need a full-time position in actuality, but given the budget crisis that towns are always in, we thought we'd start slow and in hopes that this person could bring us to a place where we would be successful in applying for grants in the future. The town needs to get more data together in order to apply for these grants, and there needs to be a strategic plan in place. And we're just short staff and personnel to drive that forward. And prevention is its own science. It's its own unique science. And somebody that is trained in prevention science is really needed to drive the process forward. I provided a lot of information. I don't know if you guys have it all.
Sure you find it.
But definitely the numbers, the data speaks to the communities that have these positions who have also posted their data, and one of the charts you have shows a comparison. And we chose those towns because they post their data publicly, and Medfield did as well. So there's no secret magic in why we picked those towns. But Medfield's use is far above the alcohol use for the youth, and the data we provided is far above the communities that have prevention support in place. And so we're really at a public health point where this is at. I wouldn't say a crisis, but definitely a serious concern. And so we've asked the personnel board and we've asked the warrant committee to consider this position at this point.
And Don, am I correct that this is being jointly recommended by you and other people or not?
Yes, I think recommended by the superintendent of schools and the chief of police. I learned a half hour before coming here tonight that there may no longer be funding from the schools, but Jeff has not told me that directly, so I don't, something that came up at the last warrant committee meeting, so I'm not privy to that. But as far as February 6th was the last time we spoke about it, and at that time the schools were committed $15,000 to $20,000 towards, whatever additional costs it might mean. So whether they gave me that much towards the salary and we cut that off of what Youth Outreach's request was and it funded benefits for the position or funded something else. But even without that, it can stand on its own. I've been around the block in 18 years, enough times to know you ask for what you need. And so the $30,000 was what we absolutely needed. to make this happen. And the icing, if it falls off the cake, because the icing on the cake would be the additional funds from the schools. But if that falls off the cake, we're still okay in our request.
So Youth Outreach is asking for an additional 30,000, and then you expected to get 15 to 20,000 from the schools. Up
Right.
Until half an hour ago.
Well, I don't know. That's third party, and I haven't been told that directly, but I just want to be honest that I heard something different. So Chief Meany wanted to have finances to contribute, but his budget didn't shake out that way. He's not sure. That was the last thing he said to me. He's just not sure where that money would possibly come from. And so what I do know is that the three of us plan to evaluate that person that gets hired and work closely as a team with that person that gets hired, so that it's not one department's control over a prevention specialist, but it's really uniquely directed by three departments, with Youth Outreach having ultimate responsibility for the role, but significant contribution from police and schools, because community change and cultural change really involves those departments very strongly.
Where did the personnel board, where did they come out on the request?
I'm not sure, because there was only one present when I presented, and they've needed to confer and go over the information.
Right, they have not taken an official vote on it, they're actually meeting on Thursday night with the warrant committee to discuss it.
Okay, the warrant committee, where did they come out?
They're not sure either. They wanted to talk more with Jeff Marston about it and the personnel board before voting. So they were able to communicate with me, there's no question of the need, but they're not certain, of their vote at this point. So.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have feedback before I start. Understand it's tough feedback. So I read the letters. When I read these letters, what I hear is that we haven't been able to really have any impact for 10 years. We have lots of people involved, lots of people with competence, none of whom have time. And so as I was reading through all these things, I was reading through this position, I was looking for something that told me what it was that the town wants to do that'll actually have any impact whatsoever on students. And what I read about is coffees with parents who really enjoy talking with each other about things. When I read the job description for this, and I apologize, it's my job to be cat dog sometimes, so it's not you, it's just, I want you to hear it. And part of why I want you to hear it is because I've gotten a little bit too closer to some parts of this kind of stuff than I ever expected to. So I kind of have a direct personal opinion. When I read the job description, there's a few things that are confusing to me. First, it says it's a full-time position, but then at the back it says half-time. So there's inconsistency in what's been asked for here that just kind of looks like we're not that organized. But when I went through the verbs in the duties, organize, coordinate, maintain, records. I read this as a position, and even from the comments from your consultant, we have a bunch of people in this coalition who have skills and no time. We need to hire somebody who will kind of administer this whole thing. And I'm saying, where's the impact? Where are the ideas about what we're really doing? I do know from direct experience 10 years back when you had the person in on the grant for 3 years, because my wife went to some of those meetings. I had kids in the school. At the end of that third year, when you asked any of the students, what did you think of this person? They said, we don't know who she is. So what I'm hearing here in the broadest sense is lots and lots of activities and grant writing to get people on board to talk to parents over coffees. And I don't see the
Well, that's
impact.
what was done in the past, and it did actually move the figures. So there was data that showed our numbers go drastically down during the time we had the youth substance, what's that called, abuse initiative grant. When we had that grant, the numbers went drastically down because over 400 parents were trained. And what we're finding is that the big issues in town is youth access to alcohol. And when they eliminated that access with that group of parents over those years, and parents were trained to know what to look out for in their youth, how to talk to their youth about substance misuse, those numbers went down. You'll see that the communities that maintain prevention services, their numbers stayed down and continue to decline. And we're right back up to where we were right as that person started. A number of factors could contribute to that, but I think that this is one of them, that we've had no prevention services since that point. We kept the group together that it mattered to, but things rarely go beyond a conversation. And with a prevention coordinator in place, programs do grow out of that and happen. But their initial role is to coordinate what everybody's doing so everybody's on the same page. Because a lot of these domains are doing things that impact prevention services. It's a whole science. There is a whole model called the Drug-Free Communities model that we've built on. And that Drug-Free Communities model is evidence-based practice. And so I'm very confident that the communities that have had this model and used this model have seen great reduction in their numbers. It's not aimed solely at students because we need to change community culture. And when there's a culture of we work hard, we play hard from the cradle to the grave, you know, we need to do something to shift that because kids are watching. Kids are watching what adults are doing, what we're doing, and they model after that. And so when we have good input at the parent level about, you know, even the very basic behaviors about where alcohol is stored and kept and whether it's locked, whether prescriptions are locked up and put away, all of those things, it definitely has an impact on the youth. And if parents are communicating and they're taught how to communicate about these issues, because, you know, as toddlers, everyone's talking on the playground. And when they're in, you know, the young grades, people are all out there communicating about the dangers that youth are facing. But when they're not being brought together to communicate on these issues, something happens around, you know, the magic years of 6th through 12th grade, where the communication slows down about these risk factors. And because kids talk like little adults, they're trusted to be little adults. And they're not. Their brain development tells us that they're not, and they're making risky choices without their parents having more input into those situations. And parents need that support. They're under-resourced in this culture and in this day and age. There's so much coming at youth that's different than 10 years ago. Cell phones, the way they connect with each other, the way they communicate with each other, the level of stress they feel because of social media and how they perceive themselves. I mean, this is my soapbox. I could probably spend all
Well,
night.
I was going to say, what I hear you saying now, I don't see in here. I hear administration, coordination.
Because that's their role, that, you know, that
No.
the story of it, and we did provide more information to the warrant committee, because they were like, tell me what a day in the life would be like. What would it look like? And when I provided that to them, I believe I provided that to Christine last week, I don't know if you've received it yet, but that day in the life information, you know, kind of summed it up for them. They were able to see it come to life a little bit more, and about what, you know, how that person is communicating with different departments and with the parent population and with the community at large and with businesses, and about how environmental change is brought into this. So it might mean lighting, you know, an area that teens hang out in and drink in, or it might mean like environmental change, but we need to collect the data in order to make that change. You don't make changes without having solid data to back it up. And we have the Metro West Adolescent Health Survey, which tells us that there's a problem, but we don't know, we have the scope of the problem, but we don't have the full picture yet. And so there needs to be focus groups done, there needs to be key stakeholder interviews done. The whole picture needs to be built before we can have a strategic plan. And that's where having an expert brought in, you know, as a staff person really helps drive that.
So two things. One, what I hear you talking about that person doing isn't what I see in the job description. That's, you know,
They know what it
that's
means.
what everybody, well, they know, but I'm going by what I see.
Yeah.
I do have one specific question. There were, tying across the different messages, one piece of this person would be a grant writer, but what got me confused was one of the, I don't know if it was Susan Cowles or your consultants, talked about the state has grants for the, I guess, for this program. If you set it up, you have grants. Medfield has applied, almost got it a couple times. First off, the grants don't get awarded unless you have a full-time coordinator.
For the
So-
state, the grants want a full-time coordinator
Right.
that has, for those particular grants, we could take part of my role as a supervisor and add it
So
to
you can
that, but
manufacture,
we need to
okay.
have a certified person. For the federal grants, they're looking more and more to want a certified person in leadership and to
Right.
see that towns have made a commitment on their own with some sort of in-kind funding for prevention services. We've tried for only the federal grants. The state grants we don't qualify to apply to at this point in time.
Because then there was another place that said we applied and we didn't get it because we didn't have the demographics. So all of that was
Because our
a long
numbers
way
were
of
low.
saying, let's
We were
hire
still-
somebody.
Right, we were not at the crisis point we're at now. When we applied, we were applying at the end of the YSAI 2 years out, because there was some political stuff that happened that I don't need to hash here, except that departments weren't working as nicely together as they are now. And so there's much more communication between our departments, there's been growth and trust built. And so I think that that's part of the work of coalitions too. You know, it's all this sort of process stuff that, you know, folks who are action-oriented don't enjoy as much. But there's been inroads made. So 2 years out from that, our data was going down, but it didn't look like it looks now. There are communities that look far worse than we look. Now we're the ones that look pretty bad, and everybody else is looking, you know, we're worse than the state level, and I believe, I don't want to misquote it, the data's there, but I believe it's in the, I want to be clear, I get fired up. I believe it's used one or more times in the past 30 days. We're at 42%, whereas Medfield, Metro West Massachusetts and the whole United States is about 10 points less than that. You know, 9 to 10 percentage points less than that. I mean, there's a lot of alcohol use in our youth that is higher than the region or the state. You know, and what I'm finding I think I was blown away when my coworker Chelsea said, what can I do to be helpful, Dawn? When she knew I had to go back to the warrant committee and present more of this, I said, you know, what I would love to know is what other communities' data looks like in comparison to ours, because I haven't seen that. And so she went and pulled up all their youth risk behavior surveys, the ones who have posted it on their websites, the school departments that have, and Medfield's been great in doing that this year, posting the whole entire thing. So we were able to find communities that posted all or most of their data, and when we compared ourselves, the communities that have posted are communities with active prevention plans. They're far lower than ours, and it was very telling. I was like, whoa, I wasn't expecting the numbers to look quite like that, but they do. So, you know, it's a staffing issue. We are just so under-resourced. Right now, our department coordinates also a brand-new suicide prevention coalition. We take in clinical referrals, and we're doing clinical referrals, we're doing counseling, we're doing needs-based assistance for the community, and that's very busy, you know, with a lot more folks struggling than before. And we find that with each one of those referrals, we're finding that it's multi-problem, complex situations, that people need a lot of care and a lot of mental health services provided that we can direct them to and get them hooked up with. And so, you know, to have a specialist dealing in this way, I thought that's the best use of our dollars right now, because as a social worker, I can run in a million directions, but when I'm in the middle of trying to build these connections and do this type of work, sort of on an island, and then the phone rings and it's somebody calling with a mental health crisis, the rest of my day goes to that person who's at risk. And this falls by the wayside constantly. And I think the coalition of people that have come together for the past 10 to 14 years deserve, you know, some real leadership in this area that has the dedicated time for that leadership as well.
Just a couple of questions. If the primary target of this is, it sounds like parents of middle school and high school kids, why isn't this a school position? It's essentially parent education coordinator.
The target is not just parents. The target is the whole community, like environmental changes that will promote social norms marketing campaigns that cover the whole community. Where these programs typically start is with youth and with parents, but they grow out to the whole community. So the communities that started them in the schools have all moved them to their towns, you know, by and large. And that's true for Leyland, it's now a town position. That's true for Natick, it's now a town position. And I believe that, other towns as well, that is true for, that they've had to pull it away because then it's viewed to be only about youth and parents, when substance misuse is universal. It falls on all of us, and the potential for, impact falls on all of us. It might be somebody we love or care about, but to reduce stigma is a community-wide concern. To, deal with employees who are having difficulties is a community-wide concern. It's not just youth and families. But a lot of the work that's done there, because, who's 17 now will be 27 living in your community before you know it. So, and so these are the kinds of, issues we hope to make an impact on.
That's all set. I just would add some comments, which I went to a lecture maybe 10 years ago or something at the high school about alcohol and drug use. And I was just kind of blown away with the statistics that if the younger the children start, the incredibly higher propensity that they're going to have adult substance abuse problems in their lifetimes. It's a factor of, I don't know, is it 4 or 5 or 6 times as much? If you start with at age 15 versus 21, you're something like 4 or 5 times more likely to have substance abuse problems in your lifetime. It's just incredibly dramatic, and as a society, we should be doing something about it, is my sense. I don't know how you, and I'm glad to hear you say that these substance abuse positions can actually impact it.
They do, and they use evidence-based models that show, the numbers moving in the right direction. It's not a magic button. It's not it's not a Band-Aid either. But it takes work and it takes commitment, and the changes usually are seen 10 to 20 years overall. Like you see a curve where things really change. I mean, I'm seeing changes in their data, over a 5 to 10 year period. That's really remarkable. And so you're in it for the long haul when it's prevention services by its nature. In terms of seeing, full, complete change. But the communities that have it, are closer together in their coordination of how they care for the community around these issues. And, it works. Prevention, we'd much rather be on the prevention end than the treatment end.
And we seem to be understanding so much more about it now, about the brain function and the fact that the brains are still plastic in all of us until we're about 25, and that if you start reworking the brain with the alcohol and the drugs earlier on, you're going to have trouble later. It's going to change the brain of the kids, and it's just I don't know whether I keep thinking that if you give the people the data, that they'll make the right choice, but I'm not sure that the kids are going to make the right choice, even knowing that how high the risk is for them. And then again, and as you say, we're in a community where I know that Park and Rec has told me that people bring beer to the kinder soccer games and coolers
There's been all
and
kinds of,
all sorts of things that are, there was alcohol at some football games in the past year or two, I know.
and that's the community culture piece that we're speaking toward. And the other thing I would add is through the Coalition for Suicide Prevention, a lot of our conversation has been how substances remove the inhibitions for someone who's considering hurting themselves or killing themselves. And so if we can, and how the two go hand in hand, that substances also make depression worse. And so it's a mental health issue as well. And what we've noticed in towns that have funded prevention for a long time, and it started with substance misuse, that coalition becomes a well-oiled machine. People all know what they're doing after a period of time, and the different departments that coordinate know what they're doing after a period of time. And so those prevention philosophies and models then go on towards, mental health promotion, and you're able to use that person as a resource in obesity, mental health promotion, all the different types of prevention services that benefit a town. And so we've seen folks grow their service through grants and through good, solid prevention, public health practice to impact the community well beyond just substance misuse. So you know, it brings me hope. It's a hopeful thing. I think a lot of the work I do, somebody's already hit a really tough spot. But prevention, like somebody's like, oh, yeah, I was talking to a prevention specialist recently who said, oh, you do that work, you must hate going to work every day. And I said, oh no, my job is filled with hope. My job is that, we're coming in on this, to prevent harm. It's those clinicians that, they have the tough job, but we're coming in to prevent harm. And so I'll leave you hopefully with that, with the hope, in mind that this could really have an impact.
And it certainly sounds like a very serious problem. Susan Cowell's numbers are horrible. A quarter of the high school kids have been binge drinking in the last month. 50% went to a party where there was alcohol in the past month. 41% are using e-cigarettes, which I assume are mainly used for marijuana probably, so.
I don't know I think they've tested what they've taken away, and there's not been that stuff in there, but I'm glad you mentioned marijuana. Like, we're in a whole new wild frontier there, and we don't even know, like, as citizens yet, how that's rolling out. And youth perception around that if it's become legalized for adults, then it must be safe for everyone, because that's how kids think, And then, and just with the opioid crisis that the whole country is in the midst of. Massachusetts is doing a lot of the right things. We've seen a slight reduction in some parts of Massachusetts around, opioid overdoses, but that's been, again, coalitions doing that work and making an incredible commitment towards the reduction of deaths and harm caused by opioids. So I think amazing things happen when people come together and also have the leadership and have a way to stick together. So that when there's like somebody disgruntled on the coalition, there's somebody going and meeting with them and bringing that person back into the fold for their skills and abilities. And that's what that person does a lot of. It sticks the coalition together and then gives them good science to move forward on.
Would you mind sending us the equivalent of Susan Cowell's numbers for the other towns that have prevention specialists?
Okay, I can't get all of those numbers, but what I provided to Christine, you can see, you'll be able to see them.
I'll check it out. I believe I emailed it to you last week, but
I didn't see this level of comparison.
I'll send it to you.
On this. I guess what I'd like to see is sort of these numbers as far back as we have them for Medfield, and then a similar period of time for these other towns that are like ours.
I requested it far back, and I was not able to access that,
Okay.
so.
'Cause that would be helpful to understand. And my reaction to this is not really a question for you, it's just that this is an increasing area of concern. We ought to find another area within town government that's a decreasing concern and find the money for this position by eliminating a position that's less important now as time has gone on, as opposed to adding overall to the budget. I think if this is an issue that's new and government needs to be involved in this, and this would be helpful, and I don't have an opinion on it yet. I do think it's the kind of thing that would be a resource reallocation as opposed to just an addition. There's got to be something among the other positions in town that are not as important as this. If this is increasingly important and eliminate that position, that would be where I would start. I'm not asking you to do that,
No,
but
I can make
from
those
our
requests to get
perspective,
those
no.
comparisons.
The data, yes. In terms
Yeah,
of
the data.
finding a position will work.
So the Metro West Adolescent Youth Health Surveys go to the schools, and the schools in the past haven't shared them community-wide. This year is, I think, the first year they've done that.
This is the first year the entire thing is out there, so. But I do know from the data that we have and what's been shared, for those numbers all the way back to 2000, I think it was 2006 to now. You can see our data go down, 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 and then the impact lasts a while, because I think when you train parents, and, parents become their own little army, that, and the only people they're surveying, that's also a problem, is the youth. We did a parent survey, we have nobody to take a look at that data and coalesce all that data for us. We have a parent survey completely done, that's based on this survey only for parents. And there's nobody to bring that data together. Everyone on our coalition has the skills, also has a big, huge prevention full-time job somewhere. And they don't have the time to extrapolate all that data and make all the comparisons back to the Moss survey for us. So even having a person to do that much,
So you'll give us what you have in terms of the data, and thank you for coming in and presenting it all.
Okay, all right, thanks very much.
for our citizen comment. Mr. Mazzaro?
I haven't seen anything at the moment.
Action items, vote to sign the warrant for the annual town election, March 26, 2018.
I move that we sign the, this is your last chance to get out of this, people. I move that we vote to sign the warrant for the annual town election on March 26th.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Discussion of board and committee appointment policy.
Did you handle that person?
Let me print them out real quickly, I'm sorry.
I don't think it's changed, I mean, I think it was just a matter of.
Does everybody have their copy?
I
Was
don't
it from
have.
the last discussion we had?
Yes, let me print another one out.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I did not.
That was nice.
I took my long binder, and I think, just to finalize it with your edits, Gus,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
promulgate it, get it out.
Yeah.
Let's check one thing off our list.
Yep.
Took the wrong file. My apologies.
Go on to the next thing and then come back to that then. Well, the next thing's gonna take a while.
Are we ready to assign the warrant articles?
There's still some flux, but I think we're down to the basic number of articles. I don't know if you feel that you're familiar enough, or whether you want to have people come in and discuss what they're proposing.
Maybe we should just
Before you
run
assign.
through them and then we can
If you
bring us up to date on what's going on with them.
Yeah, I've been working on this since you added the 3 articles at your last meeting. And Mark and I had met with Joy in Georgia, trying to figure out exactly what the law is on this. It's very confusing because there's 2 different statutes about dedicated stabilization funds. So I think we've finally got this figured out. But the first, of course, the town election, town offices, town report, central care, I can take that. Revolving fund expenditure limits. Probably you'd be the best one for that.
Yeah, it's just a statutory housekeeping, basically.
Do we need to add any funds this year? Are there any new funds being added?
I don't think we created anything for the machine.
This includes Gus's comments?
The municipal stabilization.
I don't have
fund
Gus's
is not
comments on it.
out.
It's not a revolving fund.
This,
Okay, the 4 unpaid bills, prior year unpaid bills. The first one is in connection with legal services for the LCB case, environmental case for the Conservation Commission.
They just didn't get it in time.
Yeah, she had switched firms or something, the firm didn't get the billing out.
So those are all 4 of those are just pretty routine, aren't they?
5, 6, 7, 8, yeah.
Yeah.
Other than the amount of the legal,
Yes.
I don't see it.
The salaries and compensation of elected officials, personnel board usually handles that. Usually that's the only change is usually the town clerk. Have they met at all on that, Chris?
Thursday night.
What?
We're meeting Thursday night.
You're meeting Thursday on that, okay. And I know the warrant committee, I believe, is not the town clerk.
The personnel board has been asked to discuss the issue with the warrant committee, but it's the warrant committee who makes the recommendation on the town clerk's salary.
Other than that, there have been no changes for a number of years. The only other paid elected officials are the selectmen and the board of assessors. So, the personnel plan, I assume they'll be discussing that Thursday. There's been some discussion of whether or not to have a general salary increase this year, or what amount it should be. The warrant committee has been talking. Have they met with the personnel board on that issue?
Thursday night.
Thursday night?
Thursday night.
Gonna be a busy night
It's a
Thursday
very
night.
busy night Thursday.
I have thrown a figure in based on some things, comments that were made at the warrant committee meeting I attended. It's just an estimate, it could be pulled out and put in. I just got a figure from Joy as to what 1% on the town salary would be, and it amounts to about $56,000, or 56, 57,000. So for each percent, you would double that, or increase it by 56. I don't know if anyone wants to take that one. Your human resources, Chris, do you want to do that?
Usually the personnel board takes it up.
Handles that, they're required by law to report?
No, there's no obligation to report. It's up to the moderator whether or not. Depends on how quickly we're moving through the town meeting.
Okay, operating budgets. I don't think we're ready to do that. The warrant committee, I spoke to Tom Murray this morning. He's hoping to have the budgets voted on their meeting next Tuesday. So my night off is no longer a night off. But they're hoping to wrap up the budgets, their recommendations on the budget that night.
Next Tuesday, the 13th.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that you view Tuesday nights as your night off.
That keeps me out of trouble. Unfortunately, it gets easier every year to stay out of trouble. Okay, capital budgets. The capital budget, you the capital budget committee representative, so that would normally be you to take that.
I will do that one.
The one thing on the capital budget is how we handle Jerry McCarty's 20-year operating budget, particularly in view of the fact that if we go with dedicated municipal stabilization fund, the first year of that is taken up funding the Dale Street feasibility study. I did mention the last time we have interest income that we've been reserving in case we had to pay arbitrage to the treasury for the school construction articles, and because interest rates have been so low, that's not an issue. I did talk to Joy. I thought it was about 500,000. She said about 450. So what I recommended, since it's a one-time deal, you don't want to build it into the operating budget because then you dig yourself a hole for the following year. That would be a good way to at least get Jerry's plan started. It would give him 450,000 in addition to the 400,000 that we normally raise on the tax levy. So that would give you a capital budget of 850,000.
I mean, I think as we go down, if we keep going down that route, I think we'll have to speak to kind of what the overall plan is going to be for dealing with capital going forward, and what the new process will be, how the stabilization fund will relate to the capital budget. And I previewed it a little bit for the capital budget committee last time we met, about how that's gonna have to change and all that. And I will, in connection with that, I haven't gotten any feedback yet, Mike, from you or Joy on the kind of process policy document that I sent you. I was hoping to get that. I'd like to get that, once I get that feedback, and then circulate it to Pete and Gus, so we can discuss that next time. Because I think that kind of gets wrapped into a whole package of kind of process changes that will be set up around the stabilization fund going
We've been
forward.
way underspending other towns that I've seen. Figures where, I think Arlington spends 5% on their capital budget.
We spend, well, usually when you take what you spend in your capital budget, you take your debt service, your capital budget, and other items that you might do a capital appropriation override or something. You add all those things together, we're probably about 12 to 14%. Because our debt service is about $6.5 million, which is 10% right there. Then you throw in the 400,000 from the capital budget, and that's another 2/3%. So you're easily up to, the 10 to 12, certainly probably higher when you take it
I don't know
over.
if they include the debt service or not in Arlington.
Yeah. It was interesting, Joy got the preliminary audit report, and we'll get you copies of that, because it's interesting stuff in there that you should take a look at. And they were saying a lot of communities adopt financial plans, that's all they do, they just adopt them because the auditors tell them they should, because they'll approve their bond rating, and they don't do anything with it. They just say, we've adopted a financial policy. So I think if you're gonna do it, you need to be serious about it, and it has to be realistic. So,
Mike, if we don't do the stabilization fund for the Dale Street project, how would we fund that $1 million?
debt exclusion override. And the problem I see there is you will lose Jerry's, the 20-year capital plan. And I think I've said this probably before, I think it's an absolute waste of money to spend $50 million building a new school if you're not gonna take care of the ones you already got. 80% of the projects in that 20-year plan are for school projects. And it's obvious, I don't blame the school administration, it was the way the state set up the law, that if you didn't maintain your buildings and let them fall apart and spend it on hiring whatever, new programs and whatnot, they rewarded you by building a new school for you. So the incentive was to let the school fall apart and not maintain it. As a result, we've got a huge backlog of school maintenance issues that if we don't, and you know, those are the hardest things to sell. People like new buildings, they like ribbon cutting, they like all the things that,
I'll tell you what I'm wrestling with, and this ties into this, because in principle, and I still need to read more of the stuff you gave us at the last meeting, Mark, on how this fund works. I haven't gotten all the way through that guideline document, but.
I mean, it's so crystal clear, it's such.
Well, as far as I got into it, I'm still tracking okay, I kind of get it. The thing that's been weighing on my, and again, I haven't read it all, and so I'm not yet in a position, but the thing that's worrying me is envisioning the town meeting where perhaps, probably, there's a school operating override based on the list of cuts that you had put out here. I think there's the possibility that there will be items that will show up as warrant articles that have potential to be operating overrides on the town side as well. This, as to fund the stabilization fund with that initial $1 million is an operating override versus a debt override that we could put debt out there at a time when the interest rates still are low. So it's not all that you're saying, it's got much more to do with what the last Monday in April is gonna look like with you know, 4, 5, 6 operating over, or debt or operating overrides on a list. And this is one that we would be adding, which wouldn't necessarily have to be added. It's got nothing to do with disagreeing with the principle behind, can we start to build up stabilization funds so that we smooth out our spikes? That's not, I'm absolutely on board with that. But I'm a little worried that as we try to get out in front of all our long-term financials, I'm struggling right now with the question, is this the right year to pull the trigger on that particular thing? But for that particular reason, that there's going to be other overrides that I think are going to be on the docket for that night.
it's never the right year.
This is potentially a little worse than some of the other years we've had, though.
But it's, the advantage is, again, is there is no, are no interest payments if you use the municipal stabilization fund, so you avoid the implications of the rising interest rate environment. But you take advantage of it because you can earn interest on the money you're putting into the stabilization.
I get all that, but the difference between put $1 million, you know, reserve $1 million to go in this year, and actually that's a lock-in for $1 million you're going to put every year, as opposed to you fund this $1 million thing this year, is where I'm.
It doesn't have to be a lock-in. The selectmen could vote to put less in. However, it reduces it permanently.
That's the part I'll get to the guidelines. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair point. I mean, I think the reality is that I think in almost any year, you can project there being something else, right? And I don't know what's gonna get through town meeting, and so I think it's it's weighing kind of the short-term problem you've identified, which is that they're gonna sort of be fatigued as all the stuff being thrown at us in town meeting this year versus the unknown of what it's gonna be like a year from now, right? I mean, you're not necessarily gonna have a bad economy a year from now, but if we're in the midst of a giant trade war and you know, we could be facing next year the problem of declining state revenues, declining excise taxes, and then we'll say, well, maybe it's not a great time to do it next year either. I mean, I think in reality, if we could have hired Jerry 4 years ago and done this 3 years ago probably would have been the best year to do it in retrospect. But I mean, we hired Jerry when we did, we had the money from the state to do the capital plan when we did. And I think what we have now, Pete, as far as, you know, I'm always a little skeptical of some of these kind of percentage rubrics of how much you're supposed to be spending on, you know, capital or whatever else, because if you scratch down on them, they tend to be rubrics developed by people who stand to benefit by, you know, construction companies and saying, well, you gotta spend this amount of money. But I think here, we're not just saying according to some kind of recommendation we have a deficit, we can point to, you know, again, is it 42 million, is it 32 million? It's some significant number of actual identifiable problems in the buildings that are gonna have to get paid one way or the other. And so really, it's a question of, I mean, in my mind, is I don't think we have a choice but to fix the buildings and keep the buildings from falling down. And it's to our benefit, you know, keep the buildings going as long as they can.
Cheaper in the long run.
Cheaper in the long run.
Yeah, I'm looking at saying, you know, for argument's sake, there's 5 overrides. If you step back and look at all those overrides, you could say there's probably no way all 5 of those overrides are going to be passed. And if they did, we would have a different set of problems with the impact it would have on the tax rate. So then if you say, well, not all 5 are going to pass, perhaps some of the ones that don't pass are ones that, you know, in a more strategic sense, should pass. But what you get is a negative vote on something, and it's the shootout at the OK Corral around the budget that's the thing I'm worried about.
Well, then I think we ought to, if that's the case, we ought to talk amongst ourselves and prioritize them, right? I mean, because if there are 5, and we don't have control over every single article, but to the extent there are articles we have control over, I think we ought to have a discussion about how these things rank against each other, and you know, maybe you're right, and this is not the year for that one, or maybe there's a couple of the other overrides that it's not the year for those, right? You gotta, you know, we can't control what town meeting does, but in terms of our recommendation and how we proceed.
Like I said, I wasn't trying to argue a position, it's just that that's been weighing on me since our last week's meeting.
It's a fair point, but I think that's how I would prefer to sort it out, prioritize it, you know.
To a certain extent, I think it boils down to the question of what's it want versus what's it need. And that isn't always easy, people disagree.
This is constituency you're talking to.
Okay, so you're, check that one.
The capital budget,
Yeah,
yeah.
budget, yeah.
And I think Jerry's stuff should go in here.
Yes,
Yeah,
it should,
just
yeah,
the-
and that's what we're planning on doing.
Just have an extra
So
funding
it'll be-
source for it, yeah.
Okay, the townwide master plan. Anybody want to?
I can do that, I'm happy to
We
speak
do
to
that,
that.
okay. Okay, park and, the next 2 are the building projects that, if that bylaw change passes, they'll have to go back and go through the permanent planning and building committee for review and recommendation. So it's kind of a awkward situation. You're putting the cart before the horse if you appropriate funding for them to go forward when they haven't. If at the same time you're gonna pass an article saying that the permanent planning building committee has to review any project over.
I mean, to me, it makes sense that they should be going to the building committee anyway,
Well,
regardless of.
So they have-
I think they're both on the agenda for the meeting coming up. I think Park and Rec and Council on Aging are both meeting with the permanent planning and building committee.
So maybe let's see what happens, comes out of that before we assign those, because they could take a
Well, yeah,
different tack.
there's 2 things probably going on. One is we would send them there anyway. I agree with Steve before they're gonna go anywhere they should go through. If I understand it right, as things stand right now, because the bylaw hasn't been changed yet, these 2 departments can put these articles on there That doesn't mean that they put them on there with the warrant committee support or the selectmen's support. For whatever reason we might not support or choose to support.
Maybe we'll defer those two and we'll see what comes, they may change their mind.
Yeah.
So then ALS is probably you, Gus?
Yeah, yeah. So let me talk about my role with ALS. I've talked briefly about this before. My intention here for our purposes of the selectmen's vote on the ALS was to basically not vote. I don't know that it's so much that I'm recusing myself as that I'm abstaining because I've been working with this committee. I do not intend as a selectman to go so far as to actively recommend or approval or disapproval. My position with the town is that the town asked this committee to take a look at the ALS issue, to come back with the best option that this committee could come up with to provide ALS support at the most cost-effective price possible. And so this committee is basically putting an option on the table before the town to get ALS support with a particular approach that has a particular price tag. I will stick with that committee in endorsing the idea that that committee has put its best option on the table for the town with the best price we could hammer out. And then beyond that, I don't want to advocate or undermine that recommendation. It's kind of I think it's truly, if we can explain it well enough to the taxpayers, this is truly a case where it's up to the taxpayers. Do you want to pay this price or do you not want to pay this price? And
No, I think under the charter, does it come back to the selectmen or does it go straight to town meeting?
I think it probably comes back to the selectmen. We've had discussion saying that if we were going to move ahead with this approach, we thought it should go to town meeting. I mean, forget the funding side of it. If we even wanted to do this, we thought that it should be put before town meeting. But I
think it comes back to Board of Selectmen.
I think it comes back to Board of Selectmen, and so now I'm trying to remember whether it was the conversation I had with the committee or the conversation I had with you guys that said that that made sense. So if,
We must have went with the committee.
okay.
We had a preliminary presentation from you
In December.
in December, and then we really gotta keep working on
Okay,
it.
well then let me put it this way. Right now, we're working on an assumption that we're gonna be prepared to go to town meeting with our recommendation and a price tag. There's plans to have some public outreach to make sure people understand the option. So technically, the committee's coming back to the Board of Selectmen. So technically, if the two of you, I will abstain. If the two of you want to bury it and not have it show up at the town meeting at all, then I think that perhaps technically is within your ability or authority to do.
I mean, I don't know
The
that.
sooner you tell me you're going to do that, the easier it'll be.
Yeah, no, I don't know that I wanna bury it without it going to town meeting. I think I would, just for kind of good housekeeping and sticking with our charter, just kind of have the position on it. It's already on the warrant, so I think even if we were to be, against whatever the final version of the proposal is, it would still go to town meeting with the selectmen not, I don't feel the same way, because there's gonna be a town meeting anyway.
Mhm.
I don't feel the same way about this as I do about the hospital plan.
So let me, this is probably almost a selectman report thing, but because we're on it, the next meeting that we have, which I think is the 20th?
No, it's the 13th.
13th, the 13th is a Thursday night.
Tuesday.
Meeting
on
When
Tuesday.
did we think we were meeting on Thursday? Well, all right.
Same time as the
Whatever.
affordable housing trust.
I've double booked myself, yes.
Okay.
You can go to the Gus's meeting.
I could have
It's
sworn
in
it said
Sarah.
Thursday night. Okay, well, I trust you, you got it. This next meeting is the one that we're going to ask the committee to formally vote on the recommendation. We have not had a formal vote. That vote, I think, will at the very least be strongly in favor. I'm not 100% sure right now, but it'll be unanimous. If it's not unanimous, I'm going to ask whoever's not on board with it to come and offer a minority report, if that's where it comes to. And then the second thing we want to do at the next meeting is to hammer out what we actually are planning to ask for FY19 if this passes. So the total $250,000 net cost, that's when you're fully built up and you're out and running. For the first year, right now, for lack of any better, I stuck a stake in the ground at the 50% mark and said it's about half the cost and it's about half the revenue and it's about half the net impact for FY19. So That's subject to the committee deciding they like that is where they want to put the stake.
I mean, assuming you vote on the 13th, you want to do this on, can we do this on the 20th?
Yeah.
And then that way we do it, the warrant hearings on the 27th, so at least
Right.
we'll have kind of gotten through this process, and does that make sense to you?
Right. And we are meeting, I think that works well, because I think we're meeting with the warrant committee on the 19th, is that, if it's 20th, Tuesday, not Monday, the 19th?
We are meeting on with the warrant committee for ALS on the night.
So we didn't want to push the meeting with the warrant committee off to the day before they go final. So we targeted meeting with them on the 19th, so that actually would work out very well.
In terms of the charge, for the charter for the committee, the only deliverable schedule was set out was initial report and recommendations to BOS by December 1st, 2017. There's no follow-up
No
until
follow-up.
the next one.
Well, we're happy to do it.
Well, I mean, I think I guess, it's probably worthwhile doing it anyway, guys.
Yeah,
so it's not a
absolutely,
surprise.
absolutely, yeah. Yep.
Because we're also gonna have John Kelly on the 20th as well.
Yeah, I have that down.
Busy night,
Those are the 2 appointments.
we'll order in snacks.
Do you have a budget?
So next warrant article, Mr. Sullivan, number 17, state hospital
Yes.
monies.
Right.
How much are we asking for?
That's $100,000 was.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that. Yeah,
So it's a placeholder. The master planning committee, at this point, I don't think the official date for a special town meeting has moved from May yet. But I think there's a good chance it could. And beyond that, I think we need to have a discussion quite separate from that. We need to look at a development committee or a concept for a development committee to moving ahead with development. So that this was built on an assumption that something will be in place, and so the 100K would presumably be something that would fund the development committee. I think we need to get through all this stuff first, but there's a couple, I think we, as a board of selectmen, need to talk some about strategies around how to go about developing that in terms of configuration. I know on tomorrow night's meeting at the hospital, they're going to be talking about options for how you configure development, so they'll at least start that conversation tomorrow night. But I think we're at a fork in the road as of the town meeting, or as of the beginning of the fiscal year, and I think the main thrust is going to be whatever this development committee is. So I don't know what the money's for, other than that it would enable that development committee to begin doing things in this coming year, actually in advance of.
So my view on this hasn't changed all that much from the last time this came up, which is that I think any appropriation relative to development of the hospital can come at the special town meeting, not at the end of the
The
time.
problem with that is that this special town meeting has stretched from last fall to January to March to May. So when we are 2 years overdue at completing our master plan to begin development. So the problem with that is that basically is leaving us in limbo, and I'll predict it'll leave us in limbo for another year.
Well, I don't know about that, but I mean, I guess then I'll ask a question, since you guys go to these meetings and I don't. I mean, is this money here in the event that the master plan does not go forward and we're doing something else?
Given that, yeah, well, it's here as I would look at it. If the master plan, in terms of its official adoption or rejection, stretches out to sometime in the unforeseeable future, yeah, it's there so that we can start moving ahead with some stuff, absolutely.
So then that sort of raises another question for me, which is, I mean, it would seem strange, here's what would seem strange. It seems at some point, we've got to kind of Fisher cut bait out of the master plan and the product of the master plan committee. I don't think, and my initial reaction is that it is not fair to the committee or the town to sort of have both things happening at the same time, right? to kind of do with the state hospital property what we've kind of done with Lot 3 in Hinckley, right? Whereas it makes sense with Lot 3 in Hinckley to sort of pull it back and kind of move ahead on a parallel track. But it seems to me that if, we've got to decide one way or the other. Are we going to go ahead with this master plan? It looks like this master plan, and that's our plan. In which case, that's why I think that the money article would go at the special town meeting, because the money would be for the implementation of the master plan. Right, the money would be for the development side of the master plan, the disposition, the RFPs, all that piece of it. If we're not gonna do the master plan, right, if we're not gonna take some version of the product of the master planning committee, then I'm not sure we should be asking the town for $100,000 to just sort of trust us that we're gonna do something else that's productive and useful. Now, it's not to say we shouldn't do something productive and useful, but I think it's hard, it's hard for me to justify saying, we might have, come to the annual town meeting, we might have a special town meeting in 2 months, at which point we're gonna adopt a particular master plan, zoning changes, and then this money will be used to implement that. Or we might not, and we're gonna come up with something else, and we'll spend this $100,000 on that. I mean, it seems to me, you've got to, as you say, we are at a fork in the road or a crossroad, with this, but in fairness, it seems like we ought to make the decision about the master plan first. Whether we make that decision, or the town meeting makes that decision, just kind of in fairness to the process, and then say, okay, our next step is going to be something else. And I appreciate the timing issue with that.
So a couple of quick reactions, because I've been thinking about this for a while. There's two scenarios. One, and this, I'll be at tomorrow night's meeting, so you can quote me or I'll bring it up there. There's two scenarios. One scenario, which feels to me like a fading hope, but I could be wrong, is that the special town meeting will take place in May. I haven't seen the numbers coming together in a compelling way yet to where I'm highly optimistic. We were originally thinking, well, if the selectmen saw a good enough picture at the end of March that we were confident in the master plan, we could then commit to a special town meeting in May. Well, we got one more meeting in March, and it's in 2 weeks. I don't think, could be wrong, but I don't think we're gonna see something from this master planning committee in 2 weeks that has a rock-solid set of economic indicators and a well-articulated master plan with a palatable set of numbers. They're working on it, but I don't think we're going to see that in 2 weeks, which says I don't think we're going to commit to a special town meeting in May, which says that then says if we do anything around trying to get a vote for the master plan, we're off into the fall. So that's one, to me, that's not quite reality, but it's pretty close to my best guess at what reality is going to turn out to be. That then drops me back to say, well, then do you just not do anything for a year? Because I don't think we're going to fund the master planning committee for a 4th year. I'm not on board with that. I want us to get on with the development. So the question is, how do we finish up the master planning and get some development underway? So to your point, if that's the scenario that plays out, then you have to kind of go down the same path I am that says, well, all right, what if right now the master plan is not tied up in a bow? What do you do? And to me, I'm saying to find some way to start working on some pieces of this without the full comprehensive. The master plan itself at the conceptual level, I don't think there's incredible controversy that if we're going to do something up there, it's not like we're going to do something that's radically different than what the draft is right now. But timing, implementation approach, specifics, who's managing and all that stuff, that's all up in the air. My thought was that if we re-energize the townwide master planning committee, because one of the weaknesses I think the master plan committee's had is some of the decisions that they're being asked to make. In some ways, it's almost hard to make them when you define your scope as the hospital property, because, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with Dale Street? That has an impact on what we might want to do up at the master plan, up at the hospital. I actually think, and I wanted to actually call Mike Quinlan just to float this with him first to see if maybe he'll gag him this idea. But I actually think that at least the interim responsibility for the development of the state hospital until we have a development committee to do the work is probably a responsibility that falls onto the townwide master plan.
Well, I guess that assumes that we appropriate the money for the town like that.
You know, that's another complication that came up.
And I know.
Budget cuts from last
Well,
week. Right.
I've talked to Quinlan about this. Quinlan himself isn't sure he'll be able to do it. We have to appoint a new committee. So in terms of, their committee charter was to study whether to do a master plan, come up with a proposal for doing a master plan, which they've kind of done. They've met with the warrant committee. So I think that committee is probably done. We're going to have to appoint a new committee. If the town meeting appropriates the money for the townwide master plan, then we're gonna have to appoint a new committee to oversee. That money would go to a master planning consultant who would really run the process.
Mhm.
And I think they can run a pretty efficient process, so it's not a years-long thing, it's really a one-year operation. And so, because I think there's a narrower set of questions that they have to answer about stuff. But I think I agree with you on that, we have to do that. I just have my concern is I don't know that I agree that if we reject, or the town meeting rejects, for whatever reason, the master plan doesn't go forward, I don't know that I agree that the alternative is something that looks like what they proposed. But I would assume if the master plan is not adopted, then that's because we, or the town meeting, have concluded that for one reason or another, it's either not feasible, it's not in the best interest of the town, it's not the best way to do it. And so I would think if we're back to the drawing board on what to do, I don't know that it would necessarily be taking pieces of that master plan and trying to do it. You might take some of it.
Yeah, that's my point. I mean, I'm not saying let's take that and try to do it piece by piece. I'm saying that in terms of a general concept for what goes up there, the master plan, it's not like we're gonna have an Amazon headquarters up there instead.
There are elements of it that make more sense.
Yeah.
That can be separated out without impacting the rest of the project, just
Again,
like.
Mike's wrong there, Bill.
Yes,
Even though it's
No.
just us kids here.
I know, I'm just saying, I tend to agree with Gus, basically, that there are some elements, of the plan that are easily severable if you chose to sever them. The question becomes, what's the overall impact on the rest of the entire project, the entire plan, when you do this implementation, phasing, whatever you want to call it. I mean, personally, I'm in favor of phasing.
There is an open question that says, well, if that master plan isn't the thing that gives us the guide, we need to figure out, well, then who and how do you make, even if you're making incremental decisions, who and how makes those incremental decisions? And I don't have the answers, I think that's a discussion we need to have. My concern is that if you don't deal with that, the default is you go into drift mode for another year, and I absolutely don't want to go into drift mode.
I agree with you entirely about that, but I do, and this is, I do wonder what, I mean, if the master plan passes, there's an endorsement from the town, we've got to change zoning, we've got the zoning we need, there's an endorsement, this is what we're gonna do, then it becomes, really, our job is relatively simple, or at least straightforward, in the sense that we have to define a committee, a body, a process for the implementation of that master plan. And so, it won't be the same committee, it'll be a new committee that will deal with disposition, that will deal with phasing, what's the first part we do, those kind of questions, right?
I think there's going to be more to it than that, because I don't think the economic analysis is as robust as it'll ultimately need to be for a $500 million project.
Okay.
But it sets the direction, it gets the architectural drawing level plan done.
Right, in terms of, we're not gonna be asking ourselves the question, what do we do up there? What goes up there? What would we like to see up there? What is it gonna be? This is what the town has said they want it to be, and now it might be a really big problem from an implementation standpoint, it's really a tactical problem. How do you do it? What's it gonna cost, what do you do first, what this, you know what I mean?
So you may bring a developer in and say, I know that's what you said you wanted, and I know that's how your economics, but here's what you're gonna make
Right,
it look
but
like.
what I'm saying is that if the town meeting or the board says no to the master plan, I think in some way we're saying no to that particular process, in the sense that we're gonna have to redefine then, what are we doing? Because I don't think we can do it without a plan. We can't just sort of develop it. We can't take a rejected master plan and then try to implement it. So there's gonna be a planning component to it. It's obviously would be less ambitious than that plan. It would be
Here's the
more
difference though. You said if the town votes no, my worry is we won't get to that vote in any
Right, but it's-
foreseeable amount of time. So they won't vote no, they just won't vote yes,
Right,
because there won't be a vote.
And this is my concern, which is, if that's the case, I don't see how we move forward on parallel tracks. That's my problem. Is
So
that,
what would you do instead?
I mean, to me, I would bring the MSH MPC process to a conclusion, to say, we're gonna decide at some point, right? And to me, I think, if they come back and say, you know, we're not ready for a May town meeting, then I think we have to have a special meeting and then figure it out, right? In other words, what's left to be done? Is it the case that there's stuff left to be done because it's just sort of dotting i's and crossing t's, and it can be June? Or are there significant enough issues that it's going, and then we just have to decide, are we ever gonna get there? And if the answer is we're not gonna get there, then I think we as the board have to bring that into the process, or if we're gonna get
I
there.
don't think it's a question of never getting there, it's just a question of when. I
But
think that
what-
is a real question.
Yeah.
What if you come down to May, there isn't a town meeting, but the committee's within $10,000 of firming something up, or turning the plan into something that you can now incorporate and slap into the existing townwide master plan to qualify for 2.5% incentive on the eventual sale of
Yeah,
the property.
that's a different issue, yeah, I mean, that's.
But I mean, it all wraps
let's not lose
together,
sight of that's
but it's all wraps
yeah.
together, I mean, so I mean,
But Mike, to your point about the May town meeting, the May town meeting is or isn't gonna happen based on what the three of us decide in late March at our next meeting, or for sure sometime in April. So it's not a question of the master planning committee coming to us and saying, no May town meeting. It's actually like, we haven't seen what we need to see far enough in advance of that meeting to be comfortable calling that meeting, because I agree with you, we shouldn't have a meeting that takes place that we're then come out against. But that, if you back that up, that pushes us, original in my head was the end of March. You could probably stretch it to mid-April, but we're not gonna be, not town meeting. So that's, in terms of answering your question, it's actually, we are almost in control of that question.
I agree.
And we are in control over the next month. We're in
I
control of that.
agree.
Okay.
I mean, and I'm not disagreeing with any of that, but what I'm saying is that I don't see how we proceed, get money for a parallel track development process if the MSH MPC process is still ongoing. And so if we come to that conclusion,
Right.
if we get to May and they're real close, right? They're basically dotting i's, crossing t's, one last thing to check, then I would feel comfortable saying, look, we'll decide up or down, but we'll do it in September, right? You can't do it in July or August, you probably can't do it in June, maybe you can do it.
but you won't have any funding.
Well, he's saying do it at special time.
You do, the funding article will be the special town meeting, because what I'm saying is that if you get,
So if it gets voted down, you really don't
You
have
know what I'm
funding
saying.
until
No,
after the year.
I think what Bill is saying is if they get to May, you told them they can't have any more appropriations to spend on this project.
Yeah, you
What
have,
happens if
you
they
have to
run out of
fund it.
money
That's right.
and they need the people to work with them through to September?
right.
I'm not on board
So
with that.
I think that regardless of which way we're going here, we're gonna need some money. I mean, if it gets voted down entirely, we're gonna have to spend some money to figure out what to do next. Whether we just board it up and leave it, because there are costs with that.
and we have, we have 5 weeks, we could always just dismiss this. It could be a zero at when we get by the next town meeting.
One of the critical time factors is zoning too, because zoning takes a long time.
Mhm.
So if the master plan requires zoning as part of it, can that be done at a later date, or does that have to be done at the special?
Being done, especially.
It should be.
There's planning.
It could be done at a later date, but the idea behind, the committee got to this at first, I didn't, once they got there, I kind of liked the idea that if you have the same people who vote to approve the master plan, or at the same meeting, that vote to approve the zoning that enables the master plan. I actually like that idea, rather than shuffling the cards and playing a second hand when it comes to zoning. So I think that's a sound thing to do.
I don't think you have time to do it by May. You've got to have public hearings, you've got to have advertised hearings, you've got to have,
Yeah.
there's a lot of procedural steps that have to be taken before you can take a zoning article to town meeting.
And the planning board plays a critical role in that, and you've got a planning board that's gonna wanna be educated. And the worst thing would be for them to take a negative position on it.
Some of the, I can't speak for the committee, but it seems to me that some of the consultant work that's being done now has been, for example, she was taken off some of the RFP activity, and I'm not sure how much of her effort's being spent on the zoning. So I mean, that's all stuff that's going to be needed. It's not going to be necessary.
There's a reason we sent that guidance to the committee. We asked for two things. One was the master plan, and two was the zoning. So the other stuff, the RFP, I think is going to be, again, if you have the time to do it, it's fine, but the RFP is going to be something that's going to get reviewed by whoever is overseeing the development. So whatever gets produced here is not what's going to go out, but, you know, unreviewed. But
You need a disposition article as well.
yeah.
Right, but that would all be in a special town.
Yeah, that doesn't go on retail.
So anyway, Mike, I've been wrestling with this since the summer, to be honest with you, and the issue is to not put us into a box where things don't line up the way we hoped they would, and then as a result, we have absolutely no resources to do anything
No, I agree
until
with
we
that.
get around to next April. And incidentally, just because this maybe sounds a little negative, there's a lot of good things that the committee has done. You know, quite aside from whether everything is tied up in a bow, the cost model to start with is whoever does something, that's it, you know, that gives them a starting framework around the economics for this whole project. Maybe they'll tear it apart, but it's like it's still something that's there. Some of the design guidelines, I think, that have been developed, they make sense because they're there. So it's not like, oh, there's nothing. It's just.
Yeah, no,
whether
I
it's-
don't mean to suggest
Yeah.
the same thing. I just worry that I have the same concern you do of not having an open-ended process.
Yeah.
And then also, if we're gonna have some sort of, and I, again, not to repeat myself, but I do worry about sort of having a parallel process. It seems to me, we gotta know one way or the other whether we're doing the master plan, and so are we implementing it, and either way, we need money, and so maybe it's 50, or maybe it's.
To make it more complex, I mean, this is kind of, I've come to where I'm looking more and more, to get more and more out of the townwide master plan. I think initially I had very small expectations, and now I'm looking at questions that are, I'm not sure it's a 1 year and it's a simple thing anymore. We have an arts and culture article here. Well, the context for an arts and culture center using Lee Chapel up at the campus, it's completely different if nothing's happening up there other than the Arts and Culture Center. I don't even know that that's viable. There has to be something, it doesn't, you know, maybe the Arts and Culture Center comes first, but there has to be something up there that the Arts and Culture Center can anchor. I just think a lonely chapel up on the hill isn't gonna be a place that people are gonna flock to if that's all that's up there. So the decisions on the other buildings on the campus have implications for articles like that one.
Oh, no question. No
Yeah.
question.
So on Article 17, I'll take that one. If that's okay with you guys.
You're taking it or I'm taking it?
I'll take it.
And do we need, should we be talking as well about a special meeting to deal with the hospital in March or early April? I mean, we have a meeting on the 20th, we have the warrant hearing on the 27th. I mean, should we be-
This March or April from this committee. I was thinking,
Yes.
I thought you were a year out.
No.
Initial thinking.
I think, yeah, no, I think, Bill, I thought they had plans to come to the selectmen.
They do, but I don't have the date off the top of my
So
head.
they're meeting tomorrow night.
Okay.
It should come,
Yeah,
we should bring it up.
so I think they're
They're gonna
planning to
chart
do it.
out.
They were originally planning to do it at the end of, Steve talked about this, because originally it was supposed to come in early March. They were supposed to be here. So they said, no, we're not gonna be ready, and I can't remember if Steve said the very last, our meeting on the 20th,
I have a note that they would like to come in on the 27th,
27th.
but we
After
moved
the warrant hearing.
we moved the warrant hearings that night. They may not have known we moved the
Yeah.
warrant hearing by that point.
That's
so-
usually a half an hour or so, right? We can meet after one. Right?
It's usually no more than an hour.
Yeah,
All right, I'll hold the placeholder for them now.
we'll be here anyway, so,
Right,
So what day only?
March 27th.
the 27th.
Okay, Article 18 then is the,
Do you want to take that where you have 17 or summer related?
sure.
Pete,
I'll take
Pete.
that one.
Pete, you're gonna take both 17 and 18.
Sure.
Okay.
19 and 20, it seems to me, Mark would be the best.
Well, I thought 19 was, I thought we were gonna pull it because it's under and over described. It's not the whole Harding parcel, but it's more than the Harding
Okay, I was
parcel.
gonna have a second.
But it's a senior housing study committee article.
That's, yeah, this is,
That was, it's a,
we pulled the selectmen's 2 articles. They had 2 articles, and then we pulled both of them.
so,
So these are all the
if it's
citizens.
not a petition, it doesn't say it's a petition article.
But that's
No,
not.
but
it's
under our bylaws, the town committee can put an article on the warrant, so it's on there. I mean, it seems like 19 through 23, we ought to all deal, it should be dealt with together,
Right.
from our
Right.
perspective.
What were your, the affordable housing
Yeah,
trust?
why don't I
Take those.
If
get
you want-
myself further removed from Tony's Christmas card list?
If you want,
And I'll cover Article
I mean, I'll help, you know, I've got your back if you want me to.
Thank you, Mark.
'Cause-
We haven't gotten to your budget yet, so you don't have to say
Because
that.
there's legal issues on a number of those.
So, yeah, I'll cover 19 to 23. I'll talk to Tony before town meeting, just let him know what.
Are
We'll
they
talk
adamant
amongst
that they're
ourselves.
going forward on those?
As far as I know, yeah.
All right, then 24, meals tax money for economic vitality for the town.
This is the old
Yeah,
downtown
that's
improvements
pretty-
article.
Yeah, yeah, you wanted to
15
change
is
so
it
50 is
15,000
January
or-
10. 15,000, yeah.
Does anybody want to cover that one?
It's kind of, I'll do it this way.
Okay.
Sure.
Hopefully routine.
Yeah.
Let's see, 25 is the, that's the
Rail
rail
trail.
trail. So I'll do that one? I can do that one. 26 is, 27 and West Street intersection.
Yeah, I threw that in the event that something came about. Nothing's happened yet, but I think it's an authorization. I
To apply
think
for
you
a
just
grant.
leave to the authorization and maybe not appropriating funds.
But no money.
Doesn't have.
So you gonna take that, Mike?
I wasn't volunteering.
Oh, I thought you said that-
Clarifying how much money was
I thought you
associated.
said that was mine.
You can do it.
We
Why don't you do
don't
that one?
necessarily talk on, we don't necessarily talk on all these
No,
anyway.
no, no,
Yeah, it's only if there are
very few,
questions,
actually.
really.
Yeah.
We may actually take positions against some of these articles
Yes.
at some point.
I mean, I use that intersection
Yeah.
every day almost, so if you want somebody to be prepared to talk about it, I can talk about it, but I don't think we need to comment on
All right,
it.
you're there then.
I can take 26. Actually, probably the best one would be Bob Beanie to speak.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, actually, that's true, you know, Jeff, that's right. That's better.
And Article 27, Sarah was the one that has been putting this stuff together for this, so I just put her down for
The
that one.
pre-disaster mitigation plan?
Yeah.
What's 28 then, licenses and permits?
It's basically a housekeeping, this duct tape language in our bylaw because the state enabling statute was, language was slightly changed by municipal modernization.
That's the,
So you want
annual
that one?
one
Oh, that sounds like you have that.
Marks are out. Sidewalk easement on Metacomet, 29.
Yeah, those are the two.
I can handle that too.
Okay, thank you. 30 is
Same
agreement
thing.
to, oh, that's Charlotte Reineman's house.
Right.
31, transfer sewer betterments paid in advance.
I can take
stabilization.
32,
Mike
because
Sullivan.
that's.
You want to do the ambulance revolving 132 as well, Mike, did you say?
Yeah.
And OPEB, do you want to do OPEB or do you want to do OPEB, Gus?
Okay,
Yeah, you're chairman of the OPEB trust, so you probably better take that.
Bob, your official duties is
I
chair.
was gonna say, if it's allocated 480, I'll take it, if it's 400, Mike has to.
34 is the water iron manganese removal.
Maybe the water and sewer board.
Probably Mo and that, I guess, in the water and sewer board.
And then the same on 35, I guess. Yeah, Negro prepared.
Well, I think the selectmen have always been assigned the article, even if another board is going to speak to it, in case there is a question from the audience as to how do the selectmen feel about this article. So it's just a point person on the article, not necessarily to speak on it, let's call them.
I can do those two. Comment on our love of water.
You should do the marijuana one too, huh?
All right.
Then 37 is defining the permanent planning and building.
Actually,
committee.
36.
I skipped right over 36, I noticed that.
36.
I think Pete took my recommendation.
I did. I put my down to that one.
36 is my
I think you
draft
agreed.
shift, so.
I said yes.
You voted yes, or?
I said yes.
He's in charge of the article.
Oh,
We're gonna vote to ban marijuana in the town every single year from now until the end of time. Just really emphatically, we have once again.
And we have something on dogs for you this year too.
I'm not doing the dogs. I'll do the permanent planning and building committee, but I won't do dogs.
That's probably more controversial than
I'm staying away from the dogs.
So who's taking 36?
I'll take 36 and
Mike's got
37.
36. Oh, and 37.
I'll take that one
Yeah.
too, yeah.
Like,
Dogs, you wanna do dogs, you
I'll
wanna
do
do dogs?
dogs. I like dogs, I'll do dogs.
Limited dog behavior.
39, oh, that gives water and
so
sewer.
who's doing 38?
Gus is doing
Gus
38.
will do it.
All right, so you're not worrying about which ones I should be speaking to, because I've already been assigned?
Yeah, actually, Mark
Well, you
should,
should-
no,
yeah,
I'm
you
the
should be
backup,
on-
you're right, you should be on the dogs, because you pulled the bylaw from Franklin,
Yeah,
right?
sure, tell me the dogs.
Again, you
I
decide
got
to
your
speak
back,
on
Mark.
it,
Right, but
But
Gus
then-
is assigned to it.
but then Gus is assigned as
It's a
the
selectman.
selectman, in case
Okay,
somebody
well,
says,
that's
how does
fine.
selectmen
I mean,
feel
that's-
about this?
You're the big dog, I'm the little dog.
Yeah, you're,
He's the legal eagle beagle.
Yeah, you're the legal dog.
Don't encourage it.
It's only 8:35.
I'm pining for the tree comments.
Oh,
39 is water and sewerage.
I drafted that, so.
All right, so you're gonna.
Well, I'll do that one too, because I did the water and sewer. The water and sewer.
40 is waivers for landscaping requirements and,
That's planning board. It's really just to get flexibility of the planning board.
okay.
You might get some questions on the multifamily because that, they might ask the selectmen what their opinion is on that, so at least you ought to be familiar with what's involved.
Yeah.
That's where they want to define what a two-family house is, and it can be, doesn't have to be up and down and whatnot.
That was just, it's basically a follow-up on the work that they did and what they started to implement last year, so it's tightening up.
You 42, Pete?
41. Oh, 42, yeah, I'll take the community preservation, 41, no one's jumped forward for 41.
So who's taking 40 and 41?
Oh, that's right, 40 didn't get assigned either.
Those are the two zoning ones.
I'll do both of those. And 43 then. Municipal Building Stabilization Fund.
Well, let's hold off on these three.
Gus will be up to speed by then.
Yeah, let's hold off on these
I
three.
don't know where I'm coming out on it.
No, we're banning speed too.
Oh,
All right.
So what are we not, are we doing the 40, we're doing the last one?
I was
Yeah,
just
I
hold
think-
off pending further work
Yeah,
from
I-
us on it.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're back to the
Yeah.
proposed structure for planning committees that you.
So we need to get as amended by Gus for this, and I apologize for not,
Yeah, Mike, you were looking, those, I have my copy of that, so
Okay.
if you,
yeah, because I was fine with all of your changes.
yeah.
Deleting the Exhibit B committees
just a.
Yeah,
and the rest of the stuff to the, um,
43.
if you
yeah, that
wanna
made sense to me.
look at that, the Gus's comments, basically strike Exhibit B. And so do you want to give, can you email that to Christine?
Yep.
And if Pete, you're okay with that, we can adopt that.
Yeah.
You'd rather have an email, right? Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I can do that.
But basically, it just, so you're striking exhibit B and
It'll,
Gus
Oh,
has.
you
so
want that?
so I'm gonna send you an email that's got that.
Perfect, so I'll amend that and change
It's
that.
all,
in the
it's all
text.
track changes.
And then can Evelyn put together a cover memo from us to all the committees?
Mm-hmm.
It'll be sent out, and it'll say this is the policy, and I look forward to hearing from you in June. And then I would move that we adopt the board and committee appointment policy as amended by Gus.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Yes. Okay, pending, so we've done that town administrator update. Chris or Mike?
There actually are a couple other pending items that, I don't know why we keep dropping pending items. There was,
They didn't care, Evelyn and I switched, I turned the agenda back over to her and she may not have realized that we hadn't finished the ones that were on
okay,
there.
so I'm happy to just, I'm actually not happy to push the town goals off yet again, because it's taken us 6 months to do them, and it's taken us 6 months to get them out. Can I suggest that Christine, so the town goals we had pretty much settled on. We talked about trying to get them distributed out, Pete on your blog, Mike on your note, I'd send something to Pat.
Yeah, I'm gonna put a
Put it on
a special page on the website just for the town goals.
And then there'll be a special page for the town goals. The only issue that we need to work out is what the instructions are that we want to ask people, ideally to send either presumably by email, or there may be more than one way to do it, but if you guys are okay, I'll just work that channel out with Christine, and then once that's out, I'll send this thing out, tell you guys, go ahead and release it that way, and let's get it out. I wanted to get it out in advance of the town meeting, in hopes that perhaps that gives people a better perspective in thinking about these issues they're gonna be voting on in town meeting. It might help get people to think about it better. So I'll get with you this week.
Can we set up a dedicated email address, like
Yeah.
town goals and that?
Town goals at Medfield.net.
So the other pending items we had were lot 3, RFP, which I guess you guys had a special meeting
Yeah,
before this one.
yep.
And did you get that worked out, or? No,
We
it was
worked some
wonderful.
things
It was
out.
fun.
We should do it before every one of us. Hour early, look, it's only 8:30 and we're almost done.
Right.
I think it's because we
It was
started.
input to Sarah to further revise her draft.
Excellent. And then the other pending items we had were the town administrator evaluation process. And what we did was we gave Mike the money, and then we put off the evaluation, but it's hard to do the evaluation.
He didn't want to tell us what little he had done to make us regret what he gave him for money, I think is what it.
And then we annual
That was so
appointments we
last
took
year.
care of, so.
Did I miss
Okay.
the clawback provisions?
Well, you were gonna do goals, you were doing your goals for this year.
For the current year.
Yeah, for the current.
And I was doing an evaluation of the past year.
We did that, we did the evaluation for the past year, we were doing goals for the current.
And anything else? Town administrator updates?
We had a meeting this afternoon on the storms, and I would say that the highway department and police and everybody did a great job on the past storms, past weekend.
Good.
They've been cleaning out the brush, there was a lot of brush damage, and trees down, including my own front yard. They worked following the Eversource crews, cleaning up, there was a lot of branches down in the road that it was hard to see, and they got out there right away with chainsaws and cut them up and pushed them aside, so that people would not hit them driving in the dark. So, we had a meeting this afternoon at the Public Safety Building with all the party schools and Public Works and police, the facilities. And it looks like that we're probably somewhere in 4 to 8 or 9 range. But they don't know. They said a shift of a few miles could make a big difference.
You're
when
talking
you
about
get
snow
some
for
rain.
tomorrow.
Yeah. So we're gonna wait for this. It's gonna come in, it'll be light mist rain in the morning, and then the 1 to 2 inches between 12 and 6 is the prediction.
So did you guys get together to talk about the coming storm?
We always have a pre-storm meeting.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And, because you have to talk about what do you do with schools, do you know, and there was the way the storms hit, it won't be a problem getting the kids to school in the morning. It probably won't be a problem getting them home in the afternoon, but they would decide whether maybe to send them home an hour early, just as a precaution. They estimate about 1 to 2 inches coming in between 12 and 6. And then after 6 o'clock, the heavy stuff coming in overnight. And depending on where we are in the rain-snow line, we could get 1 or 2 inches an hour. And that's where you would push towards the upper end. On the other hand, if it shifts the other way, we could get more rain. So it's a very tricky situation. And then, so it becomes difficult for Thursday, what you do for, delay opening schools for a couple of hours. The storm is supposed to be out between 8 and 10 Thursday morning. So we'll just have to play it by ear. But I think for tomorrow, they will be certainly opening school, whether they dismiss early or not. I think they haven't made up their mind yet. So, and then there's talk about a possibility of another storm next Monday. But they're not sure. Good news, it's only 13 days till spring. And this weekend,
Time change.
June the clock's back this weekend.
Yeah.
They had, spring forward. That's right.
Yeah, more daylight at the end of the day.
Yes, yeah,
It's dark getting up again.
yeah. So, that's about it. It's been between trying to get the warrant figured out, and committee meetings and snowstorms. Straight out.
Okay. Selectmen's reports. Mr. Marcucci?
So Affordable Housing Trust, we will have a meeting next Tuesday with Mr. Kelly, which will be our last Affordable Housing Trust meeting with Mr. Kelly. And then we'll make a recommendation to the board for the meeting on the 20th. The follow-up items where he's going to make some adjustments to his plan on parking, add some more parking spots, and we may work out some sort of overflow arrangement with Public Works Garage in the event that there's extra spots, but he can do like a little sidewalk down to there, so he might rent some parking spots from us in the event that he's got too many cars there. And then committee members have been, or board members have been checking his references. We have 10 references from him, so they've been contacted various people who've done business with him over the years, and so we should wrap that process up. So the next meeting is Tuesday at 7:30, a week from tonight at 7:30. And then I attended the PAC 89 Blue and Gold dinner on Saturday night, and looking forward to the PAC 113 Blue and Gold dinner this coming Sunday. So next time I will give a full report comparing the two Blue and Gold dinners, which I'm sure are both equally wonderful.
Mr. Murphy?
I gave you the report on the ALS committee, so we're closing in and look forward to sitting down with the Board of Selectmen on the recommendation. And I guess the only other thing that I have, and this is more just a report, Barbara Gibbs and Dick Scolari are following up on the senior housing survey. There's still debates around exact wordings of questions to get the right answers. One of the, just as an aside, one of the interesting things, we all understand 40B housing. What we are also trying to get a handle on is this higher level category of housing called community housing. And what I'm learning is that it seems to be an elusive category in the sense that community housing is tied, I guess, into various kinds of programs that the state has. And so our consultants from COG are almost reluctant to pin themselves down too much on what constitutes community housing, because so much of it is open to the
You just
interpretation.
don't get credit for it.
Yeah, well, but the issue is if we're not worried about 40B for 40B's sake, we're worried about finding housing that's appropriate for seniors. And ideally, some seniors that maybe are not in the best of financial shape, if they don't qualify for 40B, there's this higher level category that perhaps some of them would qualify for if we could only be sure we knew what that category was and what the criteria was. The survey is intended to try to get some visibility into who would qualify for 40B, who would qualify for affordable housing, who's looking for housing of a certain price range that works. So that would be the Hinckley type thing of building housing that fits a price range that some seniors, they don't qualify for subsidized housing, but they also need a break in terms of market. And then there's a fourth category that perhaps the town won't get overly involved. So the higher level categories, I don't think we get involved financially. But the idea that there are some people who could probably pay market rate for a house, but they would like a house that's configured in a way that's senior friendly. So if you think back to when we had Tony here, and Kevin Stoddard was here, and they were talking about, well, gee, ranches sell. It's like, yeah, they do, but the ranch isn't configured for what some seniors might want. So we're trying to get good visibility over those different categories in order to get a handle on how many people fit into which of those categories.
Community housing is defined in the Community Preservation Act for one place, so.
Is it the same as workforce housing?
No.
It's different?
Although that's a version of community housing.
It's based on a higher percentage of the median income rather than the 80%.
If you go up to 150%.
120%.
The workforce goes up to 120, but we've been told that some community housing can be as high as 150%.
But again, it'll be state programs that define it.
Right. But you don't get the zoning relief for the SHI credit for it.
You don't get the SHI credit for it, that's exactly right.
I read recently where the Senate and the House are both working very quietly to come up with zoning plans that would require a lot greater density in suburban communities than currently allowed. Because they have this push, the governor wants 125,000 housing units by 2025, and he's tried to do it as a way of rewarding communities for building more housing, giving them better access to grant funds and whatnot.
The only thing I've read on that though, Mike, is the idea that zoning changes could be made with majority vote versus 2/3.
No, there's been a coalition that's been pushing for years now to update and revise the land use regulation law. And the original group was purely land reform types, and they finally came to the recognition that they weren't gonna get anywhere by themselves, so now they formed, one could only call it an unholy alliance with different groups, and part of it is and this was part of the legislation that was floating around last year, mandatory, as Mike saying, mandatory areas where you have to have, as of right, multifamily housing in your town or in your municipality. And it's stuff like that. That whole package has been revised. And yes, the governor's pushing a voluntary participation, a carrot approach. It's frankly the old Patrick approach. It will reward communities that do this. But there's also that legislation that's been refiled and is wending its way through the process.
And you know, they say, so goes California, so goes the nation, and they're talking seriously about banning single-family zoning around train lines and subway lines. So you would,
We don't have trains anyway, Mike.
by right, you would be allowed, to put apartment houses and large complexes anywhere that was near a rail line or a train station.
It's a group that wants to keep people awake at night.
Well, I think, you know, if we get to the 10% of 40B, people should not think that's the end, because there, you know, in my opinion, there's some people who won't be satisfied until they turn Boston into another New York City. They just want to build, and take away all the charm of what New England's about.
Just kind of segueing back to what, something Gus was alluding to in the discussion we had at that time with the town administrator's evaluation. I've recently learned that the Supreme Judicial Court is poised to hand down a decision any day now, which will provide further guidance. The town of Wayland Board of Selectmen went into circulated questionnaires, which were then compiled by the chair of the Board of Selectmen, all pre-posted meeting, and there's been a challenge to that process that violates the open meeting law. So
This is the case brought by the former town administrator of Wayland?
They've got a gadfly over there, it was actually a former selectman, attorney who just doesn't like calls.
That's why Mike is holding off. He wants to wait for that Supreme Judicial Court decision.
So, for me, it's mainly the Medfield Foundation volunteer awards are in the works. There were about a dozen nominations, and the Medfield Foundation is meeting a week from tonight to work that through with our community judges. Jean Minio, as the winner from last year, is going to join us. Jim James as the business representative, and Kathy Brennan as the general community representative. Let's sort it out. So, anything else? We've got another couple hours to fill.
Pete, I'm glad to hear you talk here. I thought I was just by myself, but it's good to know we're a team.
I have a novel I can read from.
Moby Dick?
No, it's the one is it Finnegan's Wake, the one that they read every year?
James Joyce.
Moby Dick, do they do a
Ulysses.
map?
Moby Dick.
They do a Moby Dick down at the Whaling
Yeah,
Museum.
yeah, the one.
On Bloom's.
Oh, yeah, Bloomsday.
Yeah.
Depends on where you want to go for your reading.
I will move it in German.
Excellent.
Second.
We're adjourned.
We just set a record.
For this fiscal year.
Oh, good.
No, this is
Only-
nowhere near the
I didn't realize
median.
I had all the folders.